Broken King's Secret Bride. The rain pounded against the window of the small kitchen, sounding like 1,000 tiny the drum beats. My father sat at the wooden table, his head buried in his hands. He looked older than he did yesterday. On the table sat a single, crisp envelope made of expensive cream paper. It carried the crest of the Blackwood family, the most powerful and feared name in the city. "They will pay off the house, Leo," my sister whispered, her voice shaking. "They will save us in the debt, but they want Leo in return." I stared at my hands. I was 18, just a girl who loved to paint, and now I was a piece of property. My father finally looked up, his eyes red with tears. "Silas Blackwood needs a wife. They say since the explosion, he has become a monster. He is paralyzed, stuck in a wheelchair, and hidden away in that dark mansion on the hill." I felt a cold lump of lead settle in my stomach. Silas was known as the Iron Boss before the accident. Now he was a ghost. To save my family from the streets, I had to marry a man I had never met, a man the world said was broken and cruel. I picked up the pen and signed the contract. My life was no longer mine. The black car that came for me was as silent as a grave. I sat in the back seat, clutching my small suitcase. We drove through the iron gates of the Blackwood estate, passing dead gardens and stone statues that looked like they were mourning. The mansion was a giant of gray stone, looming over the cliffs. A man with a scar across his nose opened the door. "I am Victor," he said shortly. "I run the security here. You will follow the rules, or you will find the hallway very long and very cold." I nodded, too afraid to speak. He led me through massive doors into a foyer that smelled of old wood and expensive cigars. The lights were dimmed, casting long, spooky shadows on the walls. "The boss is in the library," Victor said, pointing toward 2 heavy oak doors. "He does not like to be looked at. Keep your eyes on the floor unless he speaks to you." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pushed the doors open. The room was filled with thousands of books, but the only light came from a dying fire in the hearth. In the center of the room sat a high-backed wheelchair. A man sat there, his back to me, staring into flames. "So, the sacrifice has arrived," the man said. His voice was deep and raspy, like stones grinding together. It didn't sound like the voice of a young man. It sounded like a voice that had forgotten how to laugh. I stood by the door, my feet frozen to the rug. "I am not a sacrifice," I said, my voice trembling. "My name is Leo." The chair turned slowly, the wheels squeaking on the hardwood floor. Silas Blackwood was shrouded in shadows, but I could see the outline of his sharp jaw and the heavy blanket covering his legs. He looked powerful even while sitting down. "Leo," he repeated, tasting the name, a bright name for such a dark house. He moved his hand, and I saw the glint of a silver ring on his finger. He didn't move his legs at all. They looked heavy and lifeless under the velvet cloth. "They told you I was a monster, didn't they? That I would break you." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Go to your room, Leo. My sister arranged this marriage for optics. I have no use for a wife, especially one who looks like she's waiting for the executioner's blade. You are just a ghost in my house." My room was at the end of a long, drafty corridor. It was beautiful, but felt like a prison cell. The bed was covered in silk, and there were fresh flowers on the nightstand, but the windows were locked tight. That night, I couldn't sleep. The mansion was full of strange noises, creaking floorboards and the distant sound of someone coughing. I crept out of my room to find a glass of water. As I passed the library, I heard a loud thud, followed by a curse. I paused, my hand on the cold stone wall. I peeked through the crack in the door. Silas was still in his chair, but he had dropped a heavy book on the floor. He was reaching for it, his body straining, but he couldn't lean far enough without risking a fall from the wheelchair. His face was twisted in frustration and pain. In that moment, he didn't look like a scary mafia boss. He looked like a man who was trapped inside his own body. Without thinking, I pushed the door open and walked in. I picked up the book and placed it gently back on his lap. He froze, his eyes snapping to mine. They were a piercing, stormy blue. "I told you not to come in here," he hissed, his fingers gripping the armrest of the chair. But I didn't run this time. I looked at the book. It was a collection of classical poetry. I couldn't sleep, I said softly. I heard you. He looked away, his jaw tight. I don't need help from a girl who was bought with a check. Get out. I felt a spark of anger. You can be as mean as you want, Silas, but I'm the only person in this house who isn't paid to be here. Maybe that's why you're so angry. He stayed silent for a long time. The fire crackled, throwing orange light across his face. For the first time, I saw the thin scars on his forehead, remnants of the explosion. You have a sharp tongue, Leo, he said, his voice losing some of its bite. Most people just tremble when I speak. He looked down at his lifeless legs. Go back to bed. Tomorrow is the official ceremony. My family's rivals will be there. They need to see that the Blackwood Lion still has a mate, even if he has no claws. I left the room, but I couldn't forget the sadness in his eyes. The wedding was a cold, silent affair held in the mansion's private chapel. There were no friends, only men in dark suits with hidden guns. Silas's sister, Clara, stood at the front, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. She was the one who pulled the strings now. Silas sat in his chair, dressed in a black tuxedo. He looked regal but distant. When it was time to exchange rings, his hand was cold as ice. I felt the weight of the gold band on my finger, a shackle that tied me to the underworld. After the vows, a man with a cruel smile walked up to us. This was Julian, Silas's cousin and his biggest rival. Congratulations, Silas. Julian sneered, looking down at the wheelchair. She's a pretty thing. A shame she'd be spending her best years pushing a chair around. Silas's grip on my hand tightened. So hard it hurt, but his face remained like stone. Careful, Julian, Silas whispered. Even a seated king can still order a head to be brought to him. Julian laughed and walked away. In that moment, I realized that Silas wasn't just fighting his body. He was fighting a pack of wolves waiting for him to fail. Our wedding night was not what I expected. Silas had Victor bring him to his private wing, and I was told to stay in the adjoining room. There was a connecting door, but it remained locked. I sat by the window, watching the rain wash over the cliffs. I felt like I was part of a play where I didn't know my lines. Around midnight, I heard a strange sound coming from Silas's room. It wasn't a cough or a groan. It sounded like a steady, rhythmic thud. Thud, thud, thud. I pressed my ear to the door. The sound continued for an hour. It sounded like someone was exercising, but that made no sense. Silas was paralyzed from the waist down. I tried the handle, but it was bolted. Silas, I called out softly. The noise stopped instantly. Dead silence filled the hallway. Go to sleep, Leo. His voice came through the wood. He sounded out of breath, his voice thick with strain. Don't come to this door again. Not tonight, not ever. I pulled back, my mind racing. What was he doing in there? Why was he so tired? Weeks passed, and a strange routine began. During the day, Silas was a grumpy, paralyzed boss who sat in a library and dealt with shady men in suits. He was rude to me, pushing me away whenever I tried to be kind. But at night, the noises returned. Thud, thud, thud. I began to notice other things too. Silas's chest and arms were becoming more muscular. His grip was getting stronger. One afternoon, I saw him move a heavy mahogany desk with one hand just to reach a fallen pen. I decided to investigate. One evening, when Victor was busy at the gatehouse, I swiped the master key from the kitchen hook. I waited until the thudding sounds began in Silas's room. My heart was thundering in my chest as I approached the connecting door. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a tiny click. I pushed the door open just an inch. The room was dark, except for a single gym light in the corner. I gasped, covered my mouth with my hand. Silas wasn't in his bed. He wasn't in his chair. Silas was standing. He was gripped onto a set of metal parallel bars installed in the ceiling. His face was drenched in sweat, his muscles bulging as he forced his legs to move. He was taking slow, agonizing steps, his teeth gritted in pain. He wasn't paralyzed. He was training. Every step looked like it cost him a gallon of blood, but he was doing it. He would walk a few feet, collapse into a heap, and then use his incredible upper body strength to haul himself back up and start again. I accidentally pushed the door too far, and it creaked. Silas spun around, his eyes wide with shock. Without the support of the bars, he staggered and fell hard to the floor. "Leo!" he barked, his voice raw. I ran to him, kneeling on the carpet. "You can walk?" I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. "You've been pretending this whole time." He grabbed my arm, his fingers like iron. "I am not pretending," he panted, his face pale. "My nerves are damaged. Most days, I feel nothing. But I will not let them win. I will not be the broken king they want me to be." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I asked, helping him sit up against the side of his bed. He looked exhausted, his shirt clinging to his skin. "Because Julian and the others are waiting for me to be weak," he said, his voice low. "If they knew I was recovering, they would kill me before I could stand on my own. Fear is the only thing keeping them from taking over. They fear the man I used to be, and they pity the man in the chair. Pity is a shield, Leo." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "Now you know. You hold my life in your hands. One word to Clara or Julian, and I am a dead man." I looked at the man who had been so mean to me, realizing it was all a mask. He was a warrior fighting a silent war. "I won't tell," I said firmly. "I'll help you." Silas looked at me with a mixture of confusion and hope. "Why?" "I've been nothing but cruel to you." I smiled sadly. "Because I know what it's like to be sold and trapped. We're in this together now." From that night on, the dynamic changed. During the day, we played our parts. I pushed his wheelchair through the gardens, and he snapped at me in front of the guards. We were the perfect picture of a miserable, forced marriage. But when the sun went down and the mansion went quiet, I became his trainer. I helped him stretch his muscles and stood by him as he practiced his steps. I brought him warm water for his cramped muscles and kept watch at the door to make sure Victor didn't enter. "You're getting better," I whispered one night as he managed to take 10 steps without holding the bars. He collapsed into my arms, his weight heavy but familiar. I caught him, guiding him back to the chair. Our faces were inches apart. I could smell the salt of his skin and the faint scent of pine. For a moment, he didn't move. He looked at my lips, then back at my eyes. The monster was gone, replaced by a man who was clearly falling for the girl he was supposed to ignore. "Why are you doing this, Leo?" he asked softly. "I'm a dangerous man." "You're the only person who has ever been honest with me, even when you were being mean," I replied. Silas reached up, his thumb brushing my cheek. The tension between us was electric, a far cry from the coldness of our wedding day. But before anything could happen, a loud alarm began to blare from the foyer. Red lights flashed through the windows. "Intruders!" Silas hissed, his face instantly turning back into the iron boss. He hoisted himself into his wheelchair and pulled a black handgun from under his pillow. "Get in the panic room, Leo. Under the rug in the closet," he commanded. I didn't want to leave him, but the look in his eyes told me not to argue. I ran to the closet and slid into the hidden compartment just as the bedroom door was kicked open. I heard shouting and the sound of gunfire. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I listened through the vents. "Where's the girl, Silas?" I recognized Julian's voice. "Get her to us, and maybe we'll let you keep your chair." "You'll find her when you're in the ground, Julian," Silas growled. I heard the sound of a struggle, the crashing of furniture, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. I wanted to scream, to run out and help him, but I knew I would only be a distraction. Suddenly, there was a deafening silence. Then, the sound of Julian laughing. "You're pathetic, Silas. Look at you, crawling on the floor like an insect. You can't even protect your wife." I heard a heavy blow, and then the sound of feet dragging someone away. They were taking him. I waited until the mansion went silent before I crawled out. The room was destroyed. Silas's wheelchair was smashed into pieces in the corner, a mocking sign of his weakness. Victor was lying near the door, unconscious but breathing. I ran to window and saw a black, then speeding away toward the old warehouses by the docks. They didn't know Silas could stand. They thought they were kidnapping a helpless man. They were wrong. They were bringing a predator into their own den. I woke Victor up, and his eyes went wide when I told him what happened. "We have to go now," I shouted. Victor looked at me, confused. "Madam, the boss, he can't fight back. He's in a chair. Julian will kill him." I grabbed Victor by the shoulders. "He isn't what you think he is. Just drive." We raced toward the docks, the rain blinding us. I prayed to every star that Silas was okay. I knew Julian's plan. He wanted Silas to sign over the Blackwood assets before killing him. When we arrived at the warehouse, it was surrounded by Julian's men. "Wait here," Victor said, pulling out a rifle. "No," I said, grabbing a heavy flashlight from the glove box. "He's my husband. I'm going in." I slipped through a side vent, moving through the shadows. The warehouse was cold and smelled of rust. In the center of the room, Silas was tied to a wooden chair under a single bright light. Julian stood over him, holding a hot iron rod. "Sign the papers, Silas, or I start with the girl's family." Silas looked terrible. His face was covered in blood, and his shirt was torn. But when he looked at Julian, there was no fear. "You think you won because you have a gun and I have a chair?" Silas whispered. Julian smirked, leaning in close. "I know I've won because you're a cripple cousin. You're half a man." That was the moment. Silas's eyes flicked to the shadows where I was hiding. He saw me, and for a split second, he smiled. In a move so fast that I could barely follow, Silas snapped the ropes. He hadn't been tied tightly, because they didn't think he could move his lower body to create leverage. He didn't just move. He exploded upward. He stood on his own 2 feet, tall and terrifying. He grabbed Julian's arm and snapped it like a dry twig. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Julian's men started firing, but Silas was a shadow, moving with a speed and ferocity that proved his months of secret training had paid off. He wasn't a broken king. He was the god of war. I watched in awe as Silas cleared the room. He didn't need a gun. His hands were enough. He moved with a slight limp, but he was unstoppable. When the last of Julian's men was down, Silas turned to Julian, who was cowering on the floor, staring at Silas's legs in pure horror. You can walk?" Julian gasped. Silas stepped on Julian's chest, leaning down. "I've been walking in your nightmares for months, Julian. You just didn't know it." Silas looked up and saw me. The fire in his eyes softened instantly. He took a shaky step toward me, his strength finally starting to fade. I ran to him, catching him as his legs gave out. We collapsed to the dusty floor together. "You came for me," he whispered, his voice cracking. I wiped the blood from his forehead. "I told you, Silas. We're in this together." Victor and the rest of the Blackwood guards burst in then, taking control of the scene. They all stopped and stared at Silas, who was sitting on the floor, holding me tight. The secret was out. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Silas was taken to a private hospital, and Julian was handed over to the elders of the Mafia families to be dealt with for his betrayal. When we returned to the mansion, the atmosphere had changed. The servants looked at Silas with a new kind of respect, and Clara, his sister, looked at him with fear. She had been the one hoping he would stay in the chair, so she could keep the power. Silas sat in a new chair in the library, but this time the blanket was gone. He wore a sharp suit, his legs crossed casually. "You knew," Clara hissed, standing across from him. "You let me believe you were helpless." Silas looked at her, his eyes cold. "I had to know who was loyal and who was waiting for me to die. You failed the test, Clara." He gestured to the door. "You are stripped of your title and your shares. Leave this house before I decide to treat you like I treated Julian." Clara turned and fled, leaving us alone. Silas looked at me and sighed. "It's over, Leo. No more secrets. No more thuds in the night." Peace settled over the mansion, but it was a strange kind of peace. Silas was back in control, and the Blackwood name was stronger than ever. But now that the war was over, I felt a new kind of fear. Our marriage was a contract. It was a deal to save my family. Now that Silas was whole again, did he still need me? I spent my days painting in the garden, waiting for him to tell me I could go home. I had fallen in love with the man in the shadows, but the man in the light was a king. One evening, Silas found me in the garden. He was walking with a cane now, his gait slow but steady. He looked handsome in the twilight. "You're quiet today," he said, sitting on the stone bench beside me. I kept my eyes on my canvas. "I was just thinking about the contract. My father's debt is paid. Your rivals are gone. I suppose you want to find a proper wife now." Silas stayed silent for a long time. I felt my heart breaking. "You're right," he finally said. "The contract is over." I packed my bags that night. My eyes were stinging, but I refused to cry. I had done my job. I had saved my family and helped a broken man find his feet. I walked down the grand staircase, my suitcase heavy in my hand. Silas was waiting at the bottom. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was in a simple sweater and slacks. He looked like the man I had trained with in the dark. "Victor is waiting to drive you," he said. I nodded, trying to push past him. He stepped in my way, blocking the door. "But before you go, you should read the new contract," he said, handing me a piece of paper. I opened it, expecting to see a non-disclosure agreement or divorce settlement. Instead, it was a single sentence written in his messy, bold handwriting. "I, Silas Blackwood, request Leo to stay not because of debt, but because I cannot imagine this house without her light." I looked up at him, stunned. He wasn't looking at me like a boss. He was looking at me like I was his entire world. "I'm not a good man, Leo," Silas said, stepping closer. "And this life will always be dangerous. But I have never felt as alive as I do when you're in a room." He took the suitcase from my hand and set it on the floor. "Don't stay because you have to. Stay because you want to." I looked at the mansion, the place that had once felt like a prison. It didn't feel like that anymore. It felt like home. I reached up and wrapped my arms around his neck. "I'm not going anywhere, Silas." He kissed me then, a deep, hungry kiss that tasted of a new beginning. We had started as a bargain of blood and shadows, but we had become something else entirely. As we walked back up the stairs together, Silas leaning slightly on his cane and my hand in his, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be rivals and secrets. But the Iron Boss wasn't alone anymore. He had his queen, and together we were going to build a new empire, one where the light finally reached the shadows. Months turned into a year of growth and healing. Silas's recovery was nearly complete, though he still used a silver-topped cane for long walks. We had turned the dark mansion into a place of life. The dead gardens were now blooming with lilies and roses. But in our world, peace is a fragile thing. One morning, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph of my sister at her university, with a red circle drawn around her head. My blood ran cold. The past was reaching out to pull us back. "Silas," I whispered, handing him the photo in his study. His face instantly went stone cold. He stood up, his hand gripping the cane so hard his knuckles turned white. "I thought we handled everyone," he muttered, his eyes scanning the image. "This isn't Julian. This is someone higher up." We realized then that the Mafia Council wasn't happy that Silas had kept his recovery a secret. They felt he had mocked their traditions. They didn't want a king who lied to them. "They want a meeting," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. "The High Table. They've called for a hearing at the old stone cathedral." I knew what that meant. The High Table was where families went to settle disputes, but usually only one person walked out alive. It was a trap, a way to force Silas to step down. "You can't go," I said, grabbing his arm. "They'll kill you." Silas turned to me, his blue eyes fierce. "They threatened my family, Leo. They threatened you. I am the head of the Blackwood family. I don't hide." I spent the night sharpening my own resolve. If Silas was going to war, I wasn't going to sit at home and wait for a phone call. I went to Victor and asked him to teach me how to use a small lace gun. "The boss will kill me if he knows," Victor said, looking nervous. "The boss won't know," I replied, "because you're going to help me get into that cathedral." I wouldn't be a victim again. I had helped him walk. Now I would help him win. The night of the hearing was cold and foggy. The cathedral was an ancient, crumbling building on the edge of the city. Silas wore a suit of midnight blue. looking every bit the powerful Don he was. He didn't know I was hidden in the choir loft above, dressed in black, my heart racing. The council sat in the front pews, 12 men in gray suits who looked more like statues than humans. Their leader, an old man named Cyrus, stood up. Silas Blackwood, you were presumed broken. You deceived the table. Silas stood in the center of the aisle, his cane clicking against the stone. I did what was necessary to protect my interests. Deception is the language of our world. Cyrus, don't pretend you've never used it. Cyrus narrowed his eyes. You become soft. You married a common girl. To hide your shame. You are no longer fit to lead. At a snap of Cyrus's fingers, men with silencers stepped out from the confessionals. Silas didn't flinch. He just smiled. I figured you'd say that. Now! Silas shouted. That was my signal. I dropped a smoke canister from the loft, and the cathedral was instantly swallowed in thick, white clouds. I heard the coughing and the shouting of the council's guards. Silas moved through the smoke like a ghost. He didn't need the cane anymore. He dropped it and pulled 2 pistols from his coat. I used my position in the loft to spot the guards for him. Left pillar, behind the altar. I screamed. Silas pivoted and fired, his aim perfect. The cathedral became a battlefield. I felt the heat of a bullet pass near my ear, but I didn't stop. I saw Cyrus trying to scramble toward a side exit. I climbed down the stone stairs, cutting him off. I held my small gun steady. Going somewhere? I asked. Cyrus looked at me with pure hatred. You're the girl. The payment. I shook my head. I'm the one who finished the contract. Silas appeared behind him then, his face splattered with dust. He put a hand on my shoulder. I'll take it from here, Leo. Silas didn't kill Cyrus. Instead, he forced him to sign a decree that recognized the Blackwood family as the supreme authority in the city. If I kill you, someone worse takes your place, Silas said, staring the old man down. But if you live, you will tell everyone that the Blackwood line is more dangerous than he's ever been. We walked out of the cathedral as the sun began to rise. Silas was limping slightly, his adrenaline finally wearing off. He leaned on me, his weight warm and solid. We went to pick up my sister and moved her into the estate. The mansion was no longer just a house. It was a fortress for those we loved. That night, Silas and I sat on the roof, looking at the city. You shouldn't have been there, he said, though he was smiling. You could have been hurt. I leaned my head on his shoulder. You're the one who told me that everything I love is a target. I decided to start hitting back. Silas laughed, pulling me close. I suppose I created a monster. Life finally slowed down. We became the talk of the elite, a couple that shouldn't have worked, but did. Silas officially retired from the street work, letting Victor handle the day-to-day operations while he focused on legitimate business. He wanted a world where I didn't have to carry a gun in my purse. But he never forgot where he came from. Every month, he visited the hospital where he had stayed after the explosion, donating millions to the physical therapy wing. He wanted to give other broken men a chance to stand up. I started an art foundation for underprivileged kids, using the Blackwood name for good. My father and sister were safe, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a heavy heart. But one question still lingered in my mind. One rainy afternoon, as Silas was reading the library, I asked him, the thudding sounds at night, Silas, when we first met, what were you hitting? He looked up, a mischievous glint in his eyes. The floor mostly, but also a heavy punching bag I had Victor hide in the closet. I used to get so angry, Silas admitted, closing his book. Angry at the world, at my legs, at the fire. I would throw myself out of the chair and try to crawl. I would hit the floor until my knuckles bled. He reached out and took my hand. Then you came along. You didn't look at me with pity. You looked at me with a challenge. You made me want to stand up for something other than revenge. I kissed his hand, feeling the faint scars there. We had both been through so much, but the fire hadn't destroyed us. It had forged us. We had a small anniversary dinner in the garden where we had decided to stay together. No guards, no suits, just us. Silas stood up without his cane to pour the wine. He was steady, his legs strong. He looked at me, the moonlight catching the silver in his hair. "I used to think my wedding night was the worst night of my life," he said. "I thought I was being forced to show my shame to a stranger. Now I realize it was the night I was saved. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but the mansion was a world of its own. We had built a life on a foundation of lies and secrets, but we had replaced them with truth. Silas had gone from a crippled boss to a man who stood taller than anyone I knew, and I had gone from a girl sold for a check to a woman who owned her own destiny. The contract was long gone, burned in the fireplace of the library, but the bond we shared was unbreakable. Sometimes I still look at the wheelchair in the corner of the attic, dusty and forgotten. It serves as a reminder of where we started. It reminds me that strength isn't about how you move, but why you move. Silas moved for love, and I moved for him. As the clock struck midnight, marking another year together, I felt a deep sense of peace. The shadows were gone. The Iron Boss was a man of the light now, and I was right there beside him. As the years passed, we had a son. We named him after my father. He had Silas's blue eyes and my love for the sun. Silas taught him how to walk, his hand steady on the boy's shoulders. Watching him in the garden, I realized that the Blackwood legacy was no longer one of blood and fear. It was one of resilience. Silas had broken the cycle of violence, choosing a different path for our child. He was a father first, a husband second, and a boss only when he had to be. We sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sunset. Silas put his arm around me, his grip as strong as ever. "I never thought I'd see this," he whispered. "A quiet life." I leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You earned it, Silas." We both did. The wind carried the scent of jasmine from the garden, and the world felt right. We had turned a tragedy into a masterpiece, one stitch at a time. The story of the crippled boss became a legend in the city, but only we knew the true details. People talk about the night he stood up, the night he took back his empire, and the girl who stood by him. But for us, the most important part wasn't the power or the money. It was the quiet moments in the library, the shared smiles in the garden, and the knowledge that no matter what happened, we would never have to face the dark alone. I picked up my brush to start a new painting. It was a picture of the mansion, but the windows were all open and the sun was streaming in. In the center of the garden, a man was standing tall, holding the hand of a woman who was looking at him with pure love. I titled it "The King Restored." Silas walked up behind me, looking at the canvas. He smiled and kissed the top of my head. "It's perfect, Leo, just like you." We stood there together, looking at our life, knowing that the best chapters were still yet to be written.